The dusty air clung to Alara's lungs, each breath a dry rasp against the desperation that had become her constant companion. She stood on the splintered porch, the late afternoon sun a cruel glare on her face, masking nothing of the shame etched into her bones. Her father, a man made of cheap whiskey and broken promises, gestured broadly with a grimy hand. $60? He slurred, the words thick with the stench of his recent indulgence. For the girl. She's quiet, never complains, deaf as a post, mind you, so no backtalk. Alara didn't flinch. She had perfected the art of stillness, of retreating so deeply within herself that the world's clamor became a distant hum, a noise she chose not to hear. It was safer there, in the silence. The rancher, a man named Silas, stood before them. His silhouette was stark against the fading light, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a worn hat. He wasn't loud like her father, nor did he have the eager, predatory glint in his eye she'd seen in other men. His gaze was steady, weary even, like a tired old tree that had seen too many winters. He was a man shaped by solitude, and his silence was as profound as her own. Silas didn't touch her, didn't even step closer. He simply looked at her, and in that long moment, Alara felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt seen, truly seen, not as an object or a burden, but as a weary soul. Does she know? Silas's voice was a low rumble, surprisingly gentle for a man so large. Her father barked a laugh, a dry, humorless sound. Know what? She don't hear a thing, I told you. Born that way. Silas's eyes, however, were fixed on Alara. He wasn't speaking to her father anymore. He was speaking to her. Alara, he said, and the way her name settled on the air felt different, almost kind. Are you willing to come with me? The question hung in the silence, heavy and unexpected. No one had ever asked her. She was always told, always commanded. Her father looked confused, then annoyed. But Silas waited, his gaze unwavering, offering a choice where there had always been none. It was a strange, frightening freedom. Her fingers trembled, a flicker of something close to hope stirring in her chest. She couldn't speak, not with her father watching, not with the tight knot of fear in her throat, but she could nod. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Alara inclined her head. It was a choice born of desperation, but a choice nonetheless. Silas simply nodded back, a silent understanding passing between them. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a wad of bills, and handed them to her father. The transaction was complete, but the moral weight of it settled on the porch like a heavy shroud. She didn't look back as Silas led her away from the place that had only ever offered her misery. His steps were measured, his silence a strange comfort. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you want more content like this one. The ranch was not what she had expected. It wasn't a grand estate, but a collection of weather-beaten buildings nestled deep in a valley, surrounded by vast, unforgiving plains. Silas didn't speak much on the ride, only pointing out the sturdy barn and the small, neat cabin that would be hers. He gave her a plain dress, clean and well-mended, and a simple meal of stew and bread. Alara ate slowly, her gaze never leaving the worn wooden table, a constant vigilance prickling her skin. Every quiet creak of the house, every rustle of wind outside, seemed to carry a potential threat. She was a bird caught in a trap, even if the cage was now gilded with kindness. Her shame was a raw, open wound, made worse by the memory of her father's callousness, the way he had dismissed her worth with a wave of his hand. She was the burden he had shed, the unwanted thing he'd finally disposed of. Sleep offered little respite, haunted by the echoing laughter of her father, the harsh words that had always felt like stones thrown at her soul. Her deafness had begun subtly, a gentle retreat from the noise, then a deliberate choice to close herself off. It was a shield, a silent rebellion against a world that offered only pain. She remembered lying in her small, cold bed, listening to the arguments, the shouts, the crashing of things, and simply willing the sounds to fade. And they did. Not truly, perhaps, but enough. She could hear the wind through the pines, the distant cry of a coyote, but the human world, with its sharp edges and cruel pronouncements, became muffled, distant, ignorable. It was her escape, her fragile kingdom of quietude. Silas, however, seemed to respect this silence. He moved through his days with an economy of motion, his presence a quiet hum rather than a jarring chord. He left her to her own devices, allowing her space, a luxury she'd never known. He would sometimes leave a piece of fruit on her windowsill, or a fresh-cut flower, small gestures that carried the weight of unspoken empathy. She watched him from afar, a solitary figure against the vast horizon, his movements purposeful, his face often etched with a sorrow she couldn't quite name. She wondered about his own burden, the loneliness that seemed to cling to him like the dust on his clothes. Perhaps he understood her silence, not as an affliction, but as a deliberate choice. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. The uncertainty gnawed at her, a quiet, persistent ache in her chest. One morning, she found him by the corral, tending to a young colt with a sprained leg. The colt was skittish, whinnying in fear, but Silas moved with a gentle persistence, his large hands surprisingly delicate as he wrapped the bandage. Alara watched, hidden behind the weathered fence posts, observing the quiet patience with which he handled the frightened animal. He spoke to the colt in a low, soothing voice, words she couldn't discern, but the tone itself was a balm. It was the same tone he used when he'd asked her if she was willing. The image of the injured colt, vulnerable and dependent, stirred something within her, a faint echo of her own wounded spirit. She felt a hesitant flicker of connection, a thread woven not from words, but from shared fragility. She thought of her own scars, hidden beneath her plain clothes, and wondered if Silas saw them too. Days turned into weeks, a slow unfolding of a new, unsettling rhythm. Silas didn't force her to work, but Alara, driven by an inherent need to be useful, began to help. She fetched water from the well, swept the dust from the cabin floor, and silently fed the chickens. Silas watched her, not with scrutiny, but with a quiet approval that warmed her, a subtle affirmation that chipped away at her ingrained sense of being unwanted. He left her old work gloves by her door one morning, thick leather worn soft with use. It was a small thing, but it felt like an offering, an invitation. She put them on, the leather a comforting weight against her hands, and felt a tiny seed of belonging take root in her desolate heart. One afternoon, a sudden, fierce storm rolled in, darkening the sky with an unnatural swiftness. The wind howled, a desperate wail that seemed to carry all the world's sorrow, and rain began to lash against the cabin like 1,000 tiny whips. Alara, startled by the ferocity of it, instinctively sought refuge in the deepest corner of her room, pulling her knees to her chest. The storm's roar was a terrifying symphony, shaking the very foundations of the small house. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to retreat into her familiar silence, but the sheer force of the elements was overwhelming. Suddenly, a knock on her door, tentative but firm. It was Silas. He didn't enter, but stood just outside, a lantern in his hand, its soft glow a beacon against the encroaching darkness. He gestured towards the main house, his expression one of quiet concern. It was a silent invitation to safety, a place of shelter from the raging storm. For the first time, Alara hesitated to retreat. The thought of being alone in the cabin, swallowed by the storm's fury, felt too much like the loneliness that had defined her past. She looked at Silas, his eyes calm despite the chaos outside, and a small, unfamiliar courage stirred within her. She rose, slowly, and stepped out into the hallway. He led her to the main house, where a fire crackled warmly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. It was a haven of quiet warmth amidst the storm's onslaught. He offered her a blanket and a mug of warm milk, his movements deliberate, his presence a comforting anchor. Alara sat by the fire, feeling the heat seep into her bones, watching the flames dance. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, there was a fragile peace. Then Silas spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper, as if he knew she might not hear him, or perhaps that she might choose not to. Sometimes, he said, staring into the fire, the loudest noises aren't the ones you hear with your ears. He paused, then looked at her, his gaze gentle. Sometimes, the loudest noise is what you carry inside. Alara looked away, her heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm. The words, unspoken, settled between them, a recognition of burdens. She felt a profound and terrifying vulnerability. She was not alone in her silence, and perhaps he was not alone in his. As the days turned into weeks, Elara found a fragile belonging in the rhythm of the ranch. She helped Silas in the barn, learning to curry the horses, her small hands surprisingly gentle on their hides. She watched him mend fences, his strong back bent to the task, and occasionally she'd bring him water, a silent offering. He began to leave her small notes, simple requests or observations, which she'd read slowly, tracing the neat, unhurried script. It was his way of communicating, a quiet respect for her deafness. Yet it also served as a bridge between them. One blustery afternoon, a young boy, no older than 7, wandered onto the ranch. He was the son of one of the distant neighbors, a new family struggling to make a life on the harsh land. The boy was crying, his small face streaked with tears, his worn jacket torn. He pointed back towards the road, his small hand trembling. Silas knelt, trying to soothe him, but the boy was inconsolable. Elara, watching from the doorway of her cabin, felt a familiar ache in her chest. The boy's helplessness mirrored her own in countless ways, the small, innocent body bearing a disproportionate weight of fear. Silas, sensing her presence, looked up. He seemed to understand the silent plea in her eyes. He gently guided the boy towards her. Elara hesitated, her ingrained fear of human connection warring with the surge of protectiveness she felt for the child. But the boy looked so lost, so utterly abandoned. She slowly extended her hand, and the boy, after a moment's hesitation, took it. His small fingers clinging to hers, she led him inside her cabin, offering him a piece of bread and a cup of water. He ate quickly, his sobs subsiding into hiccuping breaths. Elara found an old, tattered blanket and wrapped it around him, tucking him close. She sat there, a silent guardian, until Silas returned with the boy's frantic mother. When the mother, a woman with weary eyes but a kind smile, thanked her profusely, Elara simply nodded, but inside, a quiet warmth spread through her. She had protected someone, offered safety, and in doing so, had found a small piece of her own healing. It was a quiet win, a silent affirmation of her own capacity for kindness. The fragile peace on the ranch was shattered one crisp autumn morning. Elara was collecting eggs from the henhouse when she saw a dust cloud rising from the road. 2 figures on horseback, their silhouettes growing larger with each passing moment. Her father, unmistakable even from a distance, and beside him, a stern-faced man in a sheriff's uniform. A cold dread seeped into Elara's bones, a familiar premonition of impending disaster. Her past, it seemed, was not so easily discarded. She didn't need to hear their voices to understand the danger. Her father's posture was aggressive, his gestures wide and accusatory. The sheriff, though outwardly composed, had a rigid set to his jaw that spoke of official business and impending judgment. Silas met them in the yard, his usual quiet demeanor replaced by a steely resolve. Elara crept closer, hiding behind the water trough, the familiar instinct to disappear overwhelming her. She could feel the vibrations of their voices in the ground, a low thrum that sent shivers down her spine. But the words themselves remained obscured, a terrifying, indecipherable roar. She watched as her father pointed at her, his finger shaking, then towards the main house. She imagined his accusations: theft, deception, perhaps even claiming she was a runaway, despite him having sold her. The sheriff listened, his gaze sweeping over the ranch, over Elara herself. Her father's voice rose in pitch, his anger palpable even in its silent manifestation. Silas stood his ground, his hands loosely clasped behind his back, his posture calm but unyielding. He spoke calmly, his words slow and deliberate, a stark contrast to her father's frenzied accusations. Then, the sheriff turned to Silas, his voice sharp, demanding. He was asking questions, questions that felt like stones being thrown, questions that would unravel the delicate tapestry of her new life. Silas's gaze flickered to Elara, a moment of deep, profound concern passing between them. He was her protector now, the unspoken promise clear in his eyes. But the threat was real, tangible. Her freedom, her burgeoning sense of belonging, all of it was at risk. The old familiar desperation began to claw at her, the certainty that she was, once again, unwanted, a burden to be shed. The very air around her crackled with the tension, a silent battle for her future unfolding before her eyes. The sheriff, a man named Brody, had a reputation for being fair, if rigid. But her father's venomous accusations were potent. "She's a liar, Sheriff," her father roared, his words sharp with malice. "Playing deaf to fool folks. But I know her. She's stolen from me before, and she'll steal from him too. She ain't deaf. Not really. It's a trick, I tell you." He gestured wildly towards Alara, who remained frozen, her blood running cold. Silas stepped forward, shielding Alara with his broad frame. "She has done nothing of the sort," he stated, his voice calm but firm. "She came here by her own choice, and she has been nothing but honest." Sheriff Brody narrowed his eyes. "He says she can hear, rancher. Says she tricked you into taking her in." The moral tension was thick in the air, a clash between the law's rigid demands and the quiet truth Silas knew. Alara felt trapped, exposed. Her carefully constructed wall of silence, her most potent defense, was crumbling. The sheriff looked from her father, consumed by petty spite, to Silas, who stood unwavering, his loyalty a silent, powerful force. Then Brody's gaze fell on Alara. "Can you hear, girl?" he asked, his voice low, surprisingly gentle. Alara's breath hitched. The question, asked directly, cut through her carefully cultivated numbness. It was an impossible choice. To acknowledge her hearing was to expose her vulnerability, to confirm her father's cruel lie. But to remain silent was to betray Silas, to allow him to face false accusations alone. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked at Silas, her eyes pleading for understanding. He simply met her gaze, his expression affirming, full of acceptance, telling her silently that whatever she chose, he would stand by her. It was in that moment, seeing his unwavering trust, that she understood the true weight of kindness. A whisper escaped her lips, barely audible even to her own ears. It was the first sound she had willingly made in years, a fragile tremor in the air. I hear," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse, the words a raw, painful admission. Her father gasped, a triumphant, sneering sound. "See, I told you!" But the sheriff simply watched, his expression unreadable. Alara then looked at her father, a profound weariness in her eyes. I chose not to hear," she continued, her voice gaining a fractional strength, "because it hurt too much. It was the truth, raw and unvarnished, laid bare in the dusty ranch yard. The choice to speak, to reveal her deepest secret, was a desperate leap of faith, a loyalty tested and affirmed." The ranch yard was silent, save for the distant cry of a hawk. Her father's smug triumph dissolved, replaced by a flicker of bewildered anger. Sheriff Brody, however, slowly nodded. He looked at Silas, a new understanding in his eyes. "She ain't deaf, but she ain't a liar either, is she?" he said, his voice softer now. "Just a girl who needed a quiet place." He turned to Alara's father, his voice regaining its steely edge. "You sold her, old man. You have no claim here now. And if I hear of you bothering this ranch or this girl again, you'll be seeing the inside of a jail cell." The threat was clear, the warning unmistakable. Her father sputtered, but the sheriff's authority was absolute. Defeated, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away, a solitary figure consumed by his own bitter failure. Alara stood, trembling slightly, the weight of the revelation still settling over her. She could hear the rustle of the wind through the tall grass, the distant lowing of a cow, the quiet creak of the barn door. It was all there, the symphony of the ranch, no longer muffled, no longer ignorable. Silas stepped towards her, his expression one of profound understanding, not surprise or condemnation. He didn't ask her why she had chosen to live in silence, or how she had managed to hide her hearing for so long. He simply extended his hand, palm open, a silent offering of acceptance. It was an affirmation, a recognition of her choice, her burden, and her brave revelation. "You're safe here, Alara," he said, his voice a low, steady comfort. "Always." The words wrapped around her, a warmth she hadn't known she craved. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not just the lonely rancher who had bought her, but the man who had offered her kindness, who had given her a choice, and who now offered her belonging. The choice to stay was no longer one of desperation, but of affirmation. She had found a home not in walls and a roof, but in the unwavering trust of another soul. It was a quiet win, a victory not of strength, but of vulnerability and connection. The scars remained, etched deep within her, but they were no longer open wounds. They were becoming, slowly, a testament to her endurance. The days that followed brought a quiet healing. The ranch, once a place of uncertain sanctuary, transformed into a true home. Alara began to speak more, tentatively at first, her voice a little rough, like an unused instrument, but gaining confidence with each passing day. Silas listened, his patience boundless, his understanding a constant reassurance. He would tell her stories of the land, of the animals, of the changing seasons, and Alara would listen, truly listen, absorbing each word, each inflection, each nuance. The world of sound, once a source of pain and retreat, slowly became a source of wonder and connection. The neighbors, once wary and curious, began to accept her. Sheriff Brody, after his visit, spoke quietly to others in town, clarifying the truth of Alara's situation. There were no more false accusations, no public shaming. The whispers, if they existed, remained distant, unable to penetrate the quiet strength of the home she was building. Alara even began to hum sometimes, a soft, tuneless melody as she went about her chores, a sound she had never dared to make before. It was a subtle sign of the peace that had settled in her heart, like the calm after a fierce winter storm. Silas, too, seemed to shed some of his solitude. His quiet demeanor remained, but there was a lightness in his step, a gentle smile that appeared more often. He spoke of plans for the ranch, of expanding the herd, of mending the old shed. They were shared dreams now, built on the foundation of trust and companionship. Alara learned to ride, her small frame balanced atop a gentle mare, feeling the rhythm of the horse beneath her, the wind in her hair. She wasn't free in the way some people defined it, not a solitary wanderer, but her freedom was deeper, more profound. It was the freedom to be herself, to be seen, to be heard, and to belong. The scars of her past, the memories of abandonment and being unwanted, still lingered, a quiet echo in her mind. They were a part of her story, etched into her very being. But now, they were no longer a burden she carried alone. They were shared with Silas, a quiet understanding passing between them, a testament to the journey they had both endured. The future remained uncertain, as all futures are, but it was a future they would face together. The ranch, once a lonely outpost, was now a haven, a place where a deaf girl, who chose to hear, found belonging, and a lonely rancher found a quiet peace that transcended the vast, empty plains. It was a bittersweet resolution, for the echoes of pain never fully faded, but the quiet strength of their bond, built on kindness and trust, was a powerful affirmation that she was not broken. She was simply home.